Welcome to another Telltale Books video. I'm Greg.
I'm Emily.
And we're here to continue the J.G. Ballard series I've had going for a long time now with The Drowned World.
It's wet. It's drowned. And it's humid.
Stats and stuff. I forgot that.
Oh no.
Talking
Insulting
about
the
how
squirrels.
organized I am, and I don't even have the scrolls.
Gloating. Who's eating a piece of humble pie right now and whose iPad won't read his finger?
Yeah,
The struggle is real.
that's for sure.
In the interim,
Yeah,
if you want to check out our bibliographies, we do have on telltalebooks.com a website with the entire bibliographies of all the authors that we intend to or have begun reading through. So we have a fantastic database with a little bit of information of where they came from and the stuff.
Yeah, and we're going to read all those bibliographies by the end of 2025.
Absolutely not. We're going to die before we get through all these bibliographies, to be perfectly honest. But that is the beauty of a to-be-read list. It gives you hope in a future.
And
Even
it's a
if
great
it's
thing
short.
about having somebody half your age working with you.
Yeah, I'll continue
When I'm
on the
too old, I can
legacy.
say, Emily,
I'm
you
going to have
keep
to
it
find
going.
a teenager when you die to start doing this with me so they can carry on the legacy. I'll take volunteers.
Yeah. So, The Drowned World, on my bibliography, which may or may not be 100% correct, this novel is number 33 in J.G. Ballard's list of works. It was published in August of 1962. It is actually his second novel,
Okay.
and was published, first publication was by Berkeley Books, so it was published as a paperback first.
Oh, interesting.
And we have many editions of it.
Yes, Greg has collected quite a few amazing editions.
I want to point out, and I previously did a video of it, The Drowned World was originally published in a shorter novella form in Science Fiction Adventures, number 24, February of 1961.
I don't
Of
see a date on it.
1962. January, February 1962. So 7 months before the book came out, he published a version of it in Science Fiction Adventures. And I've read this
The teaser version.
and did a video talking about the novella already. So if you look for the J.G. Ballard playlist, you'll
On
find that
YouTube.
video and find out about that first version of The Drowned World.
And of course, a lot of our authors we do a playlist for as we are working through their bibliography. That is available on our YouTube channel under the caption playlists. Easy to find.
We have a lot of them.
And we have a lot.
So, do you want to do the synopsis, or do you want
Yeah.
Okay.
So the synopsis is basically the ice caps are melting and the rains are getting heavier, and they're at a point now where most of civilization is underwater,
Yes.
with the exception of some of the drier places which end up being closer to the equator. So North America is underwater, most of Europe is underwater, and most of this story takes place in London.
Yes.
So the military is doing reconnaissance, trying to figure out what's happening, trying to look and see if there's any survivors in London. And they're doing scientific research of the changing geography, geology, and biology of all of the creatures, things, and landscapes in the area of London for scientific purposes. While they're there, people have started having the same type of dream. And it feels very primitive, and it's unusual that it's happening to multiple people. So 2 of the doctors on board this exhibition by the military have started doing some research on it and are trying to find out the root reason for it. But as they do, they kind of start realizing that they themselves are starting to feel a pull to not return to normal civilization,
Yes.
but want to stay in the swamps and stay closer to nature, as nature is starting to take over civilization.
And I'm terrible with names. I'm forgetting the names.
I know,
but
I am too.
There's one of the military people decides he's just going to go off on his own. He disappears.
So yeah, one of the first mate of the ship that they are taking has decided. I think his name was Birmingham, or something like that. I can't remember.
Can't remember.
For sure. Yeah, Hammond. I can't remember. Could be anybody. So he decides to go off, and the military personnel kind of try and chase him down, try to give him reason, trying to bring him back to the ship. He escapes, and they're kind of like, we gotta leave in 2 days before monsoon season basically starts. So we gotta get out of here before it gets too volatile to get back to military base.
Right.
So they leave him behind and let him go. But 3 of the researchers basically last minute decide they're just not leaving.
Mm-hmm.
One's a biologist, one's a medical doctor, and one is the female is a researcher.
Okay.
And they just kind of decide to follow the stream, and as the ship is leaving, they bail out, they go hide, and they stay behind, and the ship leaves. And so, basically the next, 10 chapters are basically living in isolation from each other. Like, they're aware of each other, they know where each other is, but none of them interact very much. They're spending a lot more time in the landscape. The humidity and heat is getting so high that they don't really want to leave shaded areas. They kind of keep to themselves. And then one day, this ragtag ragamuffin yacht of pirates, essentially, shows up with hordes and hordes of crocodiles following them. And they're starting to stir things up, and they're looting, and they're finding treasures, and they've discovered these 3 other researchers and decide they're just gonna harass them, particularly the main captain, who is alluded to being albino. So a lot of the ship crew think he's kind of this other being sort of thing. He's kind of just taking control of everybody. There's this kind of superstition that he's actually a ghost and not even alive. So the rest of the crew's kind of scared of this guy, and he's just taken over leadership. And they go and loot museums and other places and find ginormous treasures. And there's no particular rationale other than the accumulation of supposedly useless wealth in a no longer economic system or capitalistic system, but one based on survival. This guy's just thoughtlessly stealing everything.
Mm-hmm.
And he's getting greedier and greedier. And the other 3 researchers are just kind of like, he's really obnoxious to be around, but there's this vague, threatening aura about him that they're kind of afraid to make a move, and they've been kind of sedated by the heat and the quiet life that they're a little in shock most of the time he's around. And then one day, he finds a way to block and drain a section of the city. And these 3 researchers are so primally mortified by this because they were so used to the water, they were used to the heat, they were used to this calm, peaceful ecosystem that had developed, that this just shakes their whole world.
Mm-hmm.
And in having conquered nature, this pirate goes off the deep end. They're having riots in the streets. They decide to capture these 3 researchers. One of them ends up getting killed. Spoiler alert. And basically, everybody's running amok. And there's no escape. And that's kind of where I'm going to stop.
Okay.
Because that's like the climax of the story, is basically once they find a way to drain this particular area, all hell breaks loose. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty wild and crazy and very fun. I don't want to give too many spoilers, because even though this is an older work, you really need to read it to do justice to how horrific this is to these 3 individuals.
Right. But have you ever read this book?
Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. No, I have not.
Okay. Any of you that have, you're going to find yourself in very familiar territory here.
Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness, and Drowned World by G.G. Ballard. I don't know why I just decided to make that into a song. Here we are.
I didn't realize that that's what was going on. Although There were some other shorter works by Ballard that I've
Mm-hmm.
recently read that I realized one was basically Fall of the House of Usher,
Mm-hmm.
and another one was basically a lot like Lord Dunsany stories.
Okay.
And so reading this one, I'm getting deeper and deeper into it, and it's like, I've read this story before.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, I wasn't quite sure, but I looked up online a review of The Drowned World by somebody else, and they mentioned that what Ballard was doing was basically reworking Heart of Darkness.
Okay. That's interesting.
The Drowned World is a retelling of Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, just not in the Congo. In order to get a jungle, Ballard has the sun expand and
Yes.
warm the whole world up into a what was it?
I can't remember.
Basically, one of the periods
prehistoric
of the
period,
dinosaurs.
yeah.
I forget what you call that.
Yeah. Crustacean? No,
No.
I can't remember.
Yeah, I get them all mixed up. But it was one of the periods of the dinosaur
Caspian.
periods where it was very jungle-like, and you had lizards, and so
High
in this
humidity,
story you
high
have
heat. Yeah.
the alligators getting really big and stuff, and spiders getting big.
Lizards and Komodo dragons are everywhere now.
And so he basically turns the whole world into the Congo.
Yeah.
And turns London into the river from Heart of Darkness. And this and these people looking for the guy that bailed on them are like, they're going up the river in the Congo.
Yeah.
And they run into this guy that has himself set up like a god.
Yeah.
So if you've
What
read Heart of
happens?
Darkness or seen Apocalypse Now, this book is very familiar territory for you.
Yes. I do have to say that one of the things that was very difficult for me as a reader is that in order for anything super interesting to really start happening, you had to wait till chapter 10.
Yeah.
There was a lot of mood setting where I feel like you could read the first 5 chapters, probably skip the next 5 and go right to chapter 10 and start getting into the meat and potatoes of the story, where it starts getting a little more interesting and you see the effects of what they've developed as people and what someone who's trying to become re-civilized, so to speak, but then also on a power trip ends up becoming. So that was kind of difficult for me because it felt so slow.
Yeah.
That it took so many chapters to finally start getting interesting.
It's definitely a slow burn novel, but it's also,
The world building's great.
yeah. Having started with Ballard's earliest work, and I've been working through towards, Drowned World is the most recent one I've gotten to so far. Most of his earlier short stories were more traditional. They had more action. They were more exciting. And so but they were also published in amazing stories and fantastic and new worlds. With The Wind from Nowhere, the book version of The Wind from Nowhere that he published, I noticed where he was getting more into the description
Yeah.
and less into an actual action narrative.
Yeah.
And and then I had more short stories to read, which went kind of back to what he had been doing before. But then I got to The Drowned World in Science Fiction Adventures, and I read that, and that was, it was a beautiful story. The descriptions of the world were awesome.
Yes.
The prose was terrific, but nothing much happened.
Yeah. It's a lot. It's saying a lot without saying much.
And so I thought,
unfortunately.
well, I hope this was just like the early chapters, and he published them before he published the full book, and the full book was going to be more. And so then when I read this, the full book is more. There is a little bit more action, but it still is a very slow burn story.
It really
it's not
is.
something with a ton of action. It's not something with, fights going on, a lot of tension, a lot of suspense. It is very much about,
This is cozy sci-fi.
yeah, until you get towards the end.
And then it's
you
like,
have,
oh, now they're psycho. Now it's thriller.
yeah.
Towards the end.
I feel like Ballard was more interested in describing this world of an
And he has a
eco-catastrophe, one which,
lot of strength in world building.
if a lot of scientists are correct, we could still see this thing happen.
Yes.
Maybe not
Agreed.
exactly like Ballard is talking, but we could see cities like New York and
And
London get
Florida's
flooded.
doomed. It's already a swamp. Just underwater.
Well, yeah, it always was a swamp.
Yep. Just cover it up.
But this is, and this is one of the earliest examples of talking about climate change and how it could affect our
Yes.
society. So it's important in that way. It's beautiful in its description. The prose is awesome, but if you're looking for an action Star Wars type
Yeah.
story, look somewhere else.
Yeah, this is not a very action-packed, but for Cli-Fi, this is very good world building.
Yeah.
It's still, even though it took a lot, you kind of had to get a sense of the mundane life that the three researchers who stayed behind ended up building for themselves to realize how jarring. So it wasn't that it wasn't effective, but if you're a person who wants that action, or if you're like me and you start getting a little impatient because you have 80 other things you want to read, and this just feels like at a certain point you're like, I could probably skip a few chapters, but I didn't want to miss anything just in case.
Yeah.
You could probably read up to chapter 5 and then skip the next 5 chapters and go into the next stuff. That's kind of what I developed in my head is, if I could have done it, knowing what I know now, that's what I would have done.
I agree with that. And myself, and I know a lot of other readers out there, no matter how important a book this might be historically and literarily, for the reader experience, most of us want something that moves along a little better.
Yeah.
And it was something where I really had to push myself through a lot of it, and I kept
Yes.
thinking, gee, I just had The Hidden Valley that was like that, where I read 3/4 through the book and nothing much happened. And now here's one of my very favorite authors, Ballard, doing the exact same thing here.
Yeah.
And it's like, I kind of DNF The Hidden Valley, and I seriously was thinking about DNFing
Yeah.
The Drowned World at one point,
And
because it was so slow.
The nice thing is it's not a very long book, so I
No.
kind of knew something eventually has to happen. Especially when you start getting into the character of the captain. And the more it got into that, I'm like, okay, so this... I understood the logic of trying to build, like, not just the world building, but the kind of primitive, mundane life and the slow loss of resources and the slow loss of normal life as we know it. I understand that he was using all that time to describe, to really emphasize how decivilized these people were becoming,
Yeah.
and how determined and comfortable they were with that. And even apathetic about how decivilized they were becoming, only to have this character just shake up their entire world because he was the embodiment of capitalism. Is kind of how I felt about it. Or at least
Colonialism.
Colonialism and like basically the ultimate psychotic mercenary character.
Yeah.
Like, he was extremely jarring. So I felt that, yes, having read it now, it made sense. It was effective. It was not fully necessary to the degree that it was done. But yes, I feel like it was at least worth it to kind of get the full experience of how jarring that character was when he was introduced.
But in a way, this is really the ultimate science fiction novel.
Yeah.
Because, in the time of Heart of Darkness, the situations where Heart of Darkness is placed, you had Europeans going to the Congo and dominating the natives there and taking over and taking a lot of stuff out of there.
Yeah.
Taking control, setting up British and European-led governments and forcing these people into a new way of life.
Yeah.
It was colonialism. It was pure colonialism done for the profit of the Europeans that were going there.
Yeah.
And they didn't care what they destroyed in the process. H.G. Wells took that idea and wrote The War of the Worlds.
Yeah.
How would you like it if somebody superior to you came into London and started just burning everything down and trying to
You're
transform...
uncivilized, taking over your... Yeah.
Well, and the Martians tried to transform the Earth landscape into a Martian landscape. And, that was Wells's point. He didn't really want to write a book about aliens. He wasn't really believing seriously that there were people on Mars, but he wanted to point out how would you like it if London suffered the same thing as the people in
And
the
you
Congo?
thought you were the pinnacle of civilization.
And he invented the society that would be capable of dominating London,
Yep.
and wrote the War of the Worlds. Here, Ballard is kind of doing the same sort of thing, but staying on Earth and showing how would you like it if London was turned into
A swamp.
a
Lagoon.
jungle,
Yeah, a
a
series
swamp,
of lagoons.
and
Yeah.
somebody came along with their colonialist ideas and tried to force you into it instead of allowing you to just live under your circumstances.
Yeah, and your
And
quiet
so it
little
is,
life.
it is a science fictional statement against colonialism.
Yes, and I think that's really interesting, especially putting it into the context of a Cli-Fi book. Is kind of making it like you have all these acts of God essentially happening to perpetuate that, which is entirely possible. We start seeing a lot of very interesting behavior when people are experiencing disasters. Like we're seeing it with, as of right now, LA is on fire. We're seeing looting. We're seeing a lot of desperation. We're seeing a lot of interesting human reaction and behavior to a lot of that. Some people are willing to leave. Some people are afraid to leave. Some people can't leave. And the desperation is causing a lot of different reactions from people and people groups trying to build tribes and figure out how they're going to survive this.
Right.
And I think we're kind of seeing a similar situation, but from two very different spectrums here. And watching that act of God kind of force a circumstance that's entirely out of human hands.
Yeah.
Whether it was human-made or not is another story, but ultimately it is a reaction that's act of God. Or nature, where it's just like, and it just reminds us, nature doesn't give a shit about you.
Well, no.
It doesn't.
And whether we cause it or whether the Earth just goes through changes on its own, we most likely will have to face some kind of environmental changes in the future, which
Yes.
will not necessarily be to our benefit.
Yeah, it may be a lot harder and harsher, and change all of life as we know it.
And we have to adapt or die, is what it comes down to.
Yeah, and that's the options you've got. And that's, yeah.
Unless we can advance our science to the point where we can control it. I don't think we're there.
Not on a mass scale. I think there's like microclimate
Yeah.
potential happening. And I know like China is experimenting with some of it because they're dealing with droughts and things and have been able to be successful. A lot of other countries have as well, but not onto a mass scale, no.
No, not the whole planet.
No. And quite honestly, if all we can figure out is how to successfully make rain, good for us, but that doesn't help all the other problems that can also happen. Not to
But
the mass scale.
It's probably important for us to investigate those things, because what if we do need to have a second world? We believe that if we advance our knowledge enough, we can terraform Mars and make it livable and habitable. And they think they've discovered evidence of huge amounts of water under the surface of Mars now. So the stuff is there if we can come up with the technology to do it. But we better damn well know what the hell we're doing, because
Absolutely. That environment is unforgiving.
we start playing with the whole planet. If we do the wrong thing, we could lose the whole planet.
Yeah, and a lot of people on top of it.
Yeah. So, the stakes are really high in doing stuff like that. And even with the Earth, to try and
Expensive.
control any changes going on globally, the stakes are high. Because right now, this is all we got. We don't have the technology to make it to somewhere else and live.
Yes.
So we better learn how to handle it and adapt or control it, or we're going to be history.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a good cautionary tale for that as well.
Yeah, and that's kind of those themes are all of what the Drowned World is about, and it is so relevant to what's going on today. In so many, no matter what your politics are about this, the global warming situation, there's still stuff in this novel that speak to what you're seeing happen around you and what we need to do if we're going to survive.
Yes. And moving on from that, I did have one other qualm, and maybe you can explain it to me because I wasn't fully grasping it. It never fully explained, or at least maybe I didn't comprehend, why they were all having this mass dream. I don't feel like that was really well addressed, and it could just be that I was getting distracted while reading or something. Usually I don't, but, this was a particularly hard read for the first few chapters.
I had the same feeling about that.
Yeah, I don't feel like that was very strong.
It was brought up and introduced, and it was happening to more than one person, but it was never... Then it just kind of was left behind and never really... I mean...
Hinted at right at the end a little bit?
I think he's hinting at like a race memory coming back.
Okay, and
from the distant past.
Kind of what I was getting to.
Because that's what the animals were going through. They were like going back to how they were Jurassic. How they were way back in the Jurassic period. Coming from some kind of like genetic memory inside them. And I think that's where the dreams were coming from. But Ballard never really has the doctor sit down and explain to people what's going on,
Like, he's like, I just have a theory. And then, like, so much weight hangs on this that they make the extremely high-risk decision to stay without a lot of rationale to back it up, other than it's an instinct. I felt like that was a little weak.
Yeah.
I felt like that was a weak
what
point.
It does is it makes Ballard's work more surreal.
Which,
Because you
I guess,
don't
that's
have
true.
explanations.
You have to lean on the plausible deniability.
If he would have done something like that, it would have been like the 1950s science fiction monster movie where the professor comes in and has to give a 10-minute explanation of what's going on.
Here's my monologue about everything.
And have charts and and that's most people just don't like that anymore.
Yeah.
And so
I get that.
Way back in 1962, Ballard saw that it would be a stronger book without it. But it also makes it where you're not ever really sure.
Yeah. And I felt like that I was caught between, leaning on plausible deniability for it, but also that's a pretty big decision to make. To leave yourself stranded and potentially slowly but surely losing resources until you're basically doomed to die off of a dream that's not well explained, but like a mass hysteria. And so that point kind of disappointed me. Because it just didn't feel like a good enough reason that these highly educated researchers on this military expedition to try and rescue refugees and, like, do research on the changing environment would just decide, nah, I'm not going back.
Ballard published, haven't gotten to this one yet because it was published a couple months after this book came out, but he published a story that kind of follows the same idea. It's about this capsule coming back from a moon mission, enters into Earth's atmosphere, and it's on the wrong trajectory. So instead of landing in the ocean, it lands in the Amazonian jungles.
Oh.
And you have this UN expedition going to find it. And what they come across...
Lord of the Flies? No.
No, but they come across this one adventurer that's living out there with the Indians and kind of gone back to a more primitive lifestyle. And the Indians are worshiping that capsule and the astronaut that came down in it as gods.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That's a fun concept.
It is. But it's that idea of the technology going back to the primitive, that mixture of things.
Yeah,
and
the confusion from,
I think you got that in the Drowned World in a little less direct way of this reversion back to the Jurassic.
Yeah. Yeah, but I don't know. For me, that kind of lessened the impact of the story a little bit because it just felt like this major plot hole.
Yeah.
That just kind of hung out there, but so much hinged on it.
Yeah, it could have been made a much stronger, more important part of the story. Rather than seeming like an aside.
Yeah, and maybe having more people who were experiencing it, where maybe there was a mutiny or something like that, would have probably impacted it a little more, even if it wasn't well explained. Having more of a sense of urgency to the situation would have been
Or
a little bit more interesting.
Have you ever seen Altered States?
I don't think so. Sorry.
You need to watch it.
I'm sheltered. I'm telling you. I spend all my time reading. I can't watch things.
Altered States it was originally a novel by Patty Chayefsky. It was made into a movie in the early 1980s, starring William Hurt, I believe.
Okay.
And it hinged on the idea there was a popular thing of sleep deprivation tanks, where you go into this tank and you're cut off from all
Sensory deprivation. I've done one before. It's pretty cool.
Well, Patty Chayefsky wrote this story where this researcher is using these sensory deprivation tanks and tapping into a racial memory where he starts to change physically.
Interesting.
Okay, so kind of the same idea of that reversion to the past, but using the sleep deprivation tanks. And of course, Altered States does it in a way that it's a lot easier to understand where the story's going.
Okay. Yeah, I felt like that was a big plot hole. So because of that, I feel like it's not a top tale for me.
Yeah.
It just took, between those two things, it was a lot of nothing happening, and having so much of the story leaning on the plausible deniability of this mass dream that people are having, but not being well explained, or like not having enough of a sense of urgency or enough to back it up, essentially.
Yeah.
For that that big of a decision to be made. Just made it feel like it was not a good story to me. Other great points, like the world building, phenomenal. The character building, interesting. But just those two things really didn't sell this book for me.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people could enjoy this story, but yeah, I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would.
Yeah,
for a Ballard.
I think it's really worth reading, but definitely I agree that this feels like, the way I'm reading from the earliest to the most recent, I'm doing that for a reason, because I'm able to see what I'm seeing with this one.
Yeah, the morphing.
Where Ballard is changing the way he writes. He was writing more traditional kind of science fiction, although
science
a little
fiction
more,
action,
a little more surreal. Now he's going down this new path that he wants to take his fiction. But this is only his second novel. This is only the second time he's tried this, and he hasn't perfected this yet.
Okay.
It's not as strong as it could be. But he has this idea of where he wants to take things in this whole new direction, a whole new type of science fiction that nobody's done before. And it would, from him and a few other authors, it would result in the new wave of science fiction, which kind of kicked science fiction up to being a lot more literate.
Yeah.
And Ballard was at the forefront of that change.
Okay.
And this novel, I think, stands like...
He's on the cusp.
Yeah. It's like an early Beethoven symphony where you knew he was going to be eventually doing
this was going to be the first
number
step.
9, but he's not there yet.
This is him walking so he can run, kind of thing. I can feel that, at least in the story.
Yeah.
But again, yes, those things were such hang-ups for me that I'm glad I read it once, but for me, like, a top tale is something I'd be willing to read again. This is not something I would be really willing. I'm glad I read it once. It was a great piece to read. I don't think I'd ever read this again.
Yeah. Yeah, for literature professors, great novel.
Yeah.
For the person just wanting to have an enjoying read, it's a little too slow.
Yeah, yeah. Especially for contemporary audiences with shorter attention spans. Yeah. Part of things working against me is I'm ADHD. A whole lot of nothing happening is like, what am I going to make for dinner?
I'm like that too.
I'm looking for chores to do.
I'm like that too. I really had to push myself to keep going on the book, because there were so many chapters where they were just
like, I chose to clean the litter boxes before finishing a chapter because I was bored.
Yeah.
Like, I hate doing... I'll go wash the dishes. I hate washing dishes. But I was looking for chores to do just to, like, give me a break from the monotony for a second. So, yeah, it wasn't strong in that realm, but I think if you're like me, you could probably read the first 5 chapters, get a good gist of things, and then probably skip the next 5 into chapter, like, 10 and onward.
Yeah.
Maybe go a little earlier. Maybe chapter 8 is when you could start. If you want to get a little bit more of that, the mundane, suddenly and abruptly being broken, you could probably do it by that method, and you wouldn't have missed much.
Right.
And then it'll be much more enjoyable for you. I recommend that.
So, if you do want to read The Drowned World, like I say, there's the original novella is only available in this issue of Science Fiction Adventures. The first edition was the Berkeley paperback book that was published in 1962. Shortly after that, Doubleday released through the book clubs. I don't know if it was just the book clubs or not, but this is a book club edition of combination The Drowned World and The Wind from Nowhere
Okay.
together, and they released this.
Very
And so this
post-apocalyptic.
is like the first hardcover edition of The Drowned World.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. I like
And
those illustrations on front too.
a lot of other editions have been done in the early 1980s, I think. This beautiful edition was done by Dragon's Dream, which is lavishly illustrated and an awesome book.
This would have been much more
only
enjoyable,
available
I'm
used.
sure.
Probably
I'm
as
stealing
as a visual person, I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of beautiful illustrations. It's an oversized book. Dragon's Dream is best known for its art books. Like they put out a portfolio of
Oh, and it's done in watercolor too. That's
Chris
awesome.
Voss, and they put out a portfolio of the works of the guy that did all the Yes cover albums. Names, I can't remember his name, but they did a lot of art books back at this time, and they did this book of The Drowned World, which is lavishly illustrated and just beautiful.
Yes, highly recommend. Yes, this would have made it a much more enjoyable read if I had pictures.
And not too long ago, Folio Society had this in their current books. I bought this new from Folio Society, The Drowned World. And this has a beautiful hardcover. It comes with a slipcase. It also has a lot of illustrations throughout.
Oh,
Watercolor again.
Also watercolor.
Probably
Watercolor
because
is a
it's,
nice medium.
because it's The Drowned World.
It's water. I mean,
What else are you going to paint with?
perfect.
But the Folio Society put this edition out, and you can still. I bought it new off their website when I first started buying Folio Society, but it's not there now. You can get used copies pretty easy though. And then the Glance SF Masterworks paperback series, of course, The Drowned World is part of that series. And it's a nice paperback, no illustrations, but a really nice cover on that. I think that's an excellent illustration.
Yeah, and that's a great addition to people who, as much as I love big, pretty books, small books are great when you have a lot of books.
Yeah. And I think that whole SF Masterworks series is still available, especially if you go to like Blackwell's over in the UK. If you go to their website, you can find a lot of this stuff still for sale. And
Nice generous
Emily's
margins
copy,
in
which
there.
she
I
neglected
forgot
to bring with.
I'm sorry.
That's actually one that I purchased through Dover Books. That is a new book that is currently in print, and you can go to Dover Books website and just order it. It's like, I think it was, how much did I pay for that? $12
Yeah.
or something like that. Not very much money, and you can get it from there.
Nice hardcover.
Brand
Generous
new.
margins.
No, that one was trade paperback, wasn't it?
No.
It
I
was
got
hardcover?
That was
Oh.
hardcover.
Shoot, I don't remember that. Okay, so
I'll
nice
bring it over
hardcover.
for proof. Maybe I'm forgetting.
Nice hardcover.
I have no brain.
But that's a good addition for somebody that just wants an ordinary book and doesn't want to pay a huge amount of money, and that is currently in print. So The Drowned World is available, unlike a lot of what we talk about. That one you can run out and buy it.
So yeah, recommended, but just not a top 10.
Not quite.
Not quite. It's still really good. I feel like give it a shot. Maybe you like it. And it's really unusual for me to not like stuff like that because I love textbook-esque. Like, I love the Silmarillion.
Yeah. And
a lot of
your
people have a
loving
hard
House of
time with
Leaves.
it. A loving House of Leaves. Things that are like textbooks. I love that. That dry kind of mild literature or very like thought-provoking stuff, which this is. But for some reason, it just wasn't hitting right this time. So, oh well. But thanks for joining us, guys. What's up next?
Next in my J.G. Ballard series is The Subliminal Man.
Ooh, subliminal.
Anybody who remembers the controversies about subliminal advertising from the 1960s.
With little flashes of things. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Ballard takes that idea to its farthest limit.
Interesting.
So, I do. If you have read The Drowned World, please tell us what you think. Your thoughts. Are we full of crap, or do we know what we're talking about? Whatever.
Yeah.
Any kind of thoughts you have about J.G. Ballard or The Drowned World, please leave them in the comments. If you don't like our audio, don't leave those comments because we're not going to listen to you.
Unless you can buy us something that's going to work better for us.
Yeah.
Because we are trying to pay our bills and make this work.
We're doing the best we can.
We're doing the best we can with what we got.
don't-
We are aware that our audio's not great. Please don't leave us comments about that.
We
We're
don't-
over it.
We
know.
don't need people telling us
We're
how to
not
make our
dumb. It's not
videos better.
changing.
We hope you'll just like our videos.
Yeah.
And be patient with us as we work on whatever issues we may have, like my head being cut off.
Oh, well. Don't worry about it. Who needs a head?
And
Slouch
so
more.
anyway, come
Slouch more
on
quick.
back for The Subliminal Man and more J.G. Ballard and all the other stories, authors, and topics that we cover on Telltale Books.
Which are vast and numerous. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. Please check out our Pango Books account as well as our Etsy account to help support us in our process of getting ready to publish some independently published works. We're very excited about that. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.